Hello, users, and welcome back to another episode of Above It All, the show where I tell you things that I think you should know and that I like to talk about and that I don't like to talk about, but I like talking about enough and that it's important enough to get out there. And this is a story about a man who is 70 years old and almost died from COVID-19 and barely survived. And this is the story of their reaction to the medical bill and their basic experience in the hospital throughout that time. So I've got highlighted text here. Most of the article is highlighted because I do think a lot of this article is just straight info dump. And so I'm just going to go ahead and read it all for you and just sit back and listen to this experience and just, hear it out. Okay. Remember Michael Floor, the longest hospitalized COVID-19 patient who, when he unexpectedly did not die, was jokingly dubbed the miracle child? Now, they can also call him the $1 million baby. Floor, 70, who came so close to death in the spring that a nighttime nurse held a phone to his ear while his wife and kids said their final goodbyes. Horrific. Oh my God. Is recovering nicely these days in his home in West Seattle. But he says his heart almost failed a second time when he got a bill from his healthcare odyssey the other day. I opened it and said, "Holy bleep," Flora says. A total tab for his bout with coronavirus? $1.1 million to be exact. Well, all in one bill that is more like a book because it runs to 181 pages. The bill is technically an explanation of charges, and because Floor has insurance, including Medicare, he won't have to pay for the vast majority of it. In fact, because he had COVID-19 and not a different disease, he might not have to pay anything. A quirk of the situation I'll get to in a minute, says the writer. Floor was in a Swedish medical center in Isaka. I'm not familiar with that location, with COVID-19 for 62 days. So he knew his bill would be a doozy. He was unconscious for most of his stay, but once near the beginning, his wife, Elisa Del Rosario, remembers him waking up and saying, "You gotta get me out of here. We can't afford this." Those are the words that, for me personally, just strike a chord down sends a shiver down my spine. Let me tell you a story. When my mother had a stroke, I was out at a concert. I came back and I found her. She was barely but semi-conscious, and she was on the floor in pain, and she kept asking me to help her. And when I brought out my phone to call 911, she snapped it, basically swapped at it and said, "No, you can't call anybody. We don't have the money for that." And I didn't call anybody until 15, 20 minutes later, until I realized that she was having a stroke. I didn't know what was wrong with her. And then I finally called an ambulance. But I know deep down how it feels to worry. You're having your life on the line, or someone you care about whose life is on the line, and you know that there is a way to help them. But we've been so bastardized, we've been hurt so much in this country from a lack of Medicare for all, that we think to ourselves, in these moments of stress, we think to ourselves, when these situations occur, can I afford this? Can I afford to save my own life or to save the life of someone I care about? And the answer is almost always no. So, just food for thought for you. Just the charge for his room in the intensive care unit was billed at $9,736 a day. Due to the contagious nature of the virus, the room was sealed and could only be entered by medical workers wearing plastic suits and headgear. For 42 days, he was in an isolation chamber for a total charge of $408,000. He was also on a mechanical ventilator for 29 days, with the use of a machine billing at $2,835 a day for a total of $82,000. About a quarter of the bill is drug costs. Going through it all, Flor said he was surprised at his own reaction, which was guilt. I feel guilty about surviving. There's the sense of, why me? Why did I deserve all of this? Looking at the incredible cost of it all definitely adds to the survivor's guilt. No one should feel guilty. Obviously, I shouldn't have to say this. But nobody should have to feel guilty that they got a disease. Especially a fucking pandemic like COVID-19 that was preventable. If our leadership just cared even a little bit, it was all preventable. No one should have to feel guilty for getting a disease that is not their fault. Nobody, but again, especially for a 70-year-old, it's ingrained. It is your first instinct is what is the cost. Human life is priceless. Your money should be no good there in the hospital, but instead, we live in a barbaric world where this happens, where someone says on their deathbed to get them out of there so that their family doesn't have to pay for the bills afterward, that someone, upon surviving a disease like this, thinks to themselves like they don't deserve it, that it should have been someone else who got that treatment. And it's just, yeah, it should have been someone else. It should have been everyone. Everyone should get the treatment. But not everyone is. And that's why it's so disgusting. Flor said that he's hyper aware that somebody is paying for his $1 million bill. Taxpayers, other insurance customers, and so on. Fears of socialism have always stopped us from guaranteeing full health care for everyone, he said. But there's also the gold-plated costs here. Twice as expensive per capita as anywhere else in the world. It was $1 million to save my life, and of course I'd say that money is well spent, he says, but I also know I might be the only one saying that. Again, everyone deserves to have basic human rights in this society. Nobody should be in a situation where they get sick and their entire life falls apart because of like a preventable disease. Donald Trump could have just been slightly more human and prevented a pandemic that has killed over 100,000 people. Right? 100,000 people that made those phone calls to their wife and kids with their final goodbyes and didn't make it out to tell this story. Those were their final goodbyes, and they're dead now. And, again, you shouldn't have to feel guilty for surviving. Because this isn't anyone's fault but the government. Nobody else is to blame. And again, if you don't support a universal healthcare system, you're just a psychopath. You lack basic human empathy, and you're just a bad person. You are just on every fundamental level a terrible piece of shit. Nobody should have to go through this. It is disgusting. It is traumatic. It is awful. Nobody in times of crisis should worry, how are we going to pay for it when somebody is dying? Because life is priceless. All human life is sacred. And if you disagree, I suggest therapy.